Discover how an amazing single dad janitor's unexpected warning changed everything before takeoff. Mark wrestled with the mop in Terminal 4, each swipe of the wet floor echoing his determination to make a better life for his daughter. He stole glances at smartphones buzzing, travelers oblivious to his existence, consumed by their own busy lives. At 45, he was the kind of man who lived by honesty and hard work. But the worry of rising bills and college applications drummed in his chest, a relentless reminder of the weight he carried. Lily, his high school senior, was determined to attend college, and that scholarship interview tomorrow was her best shot. His heart surged with pride as he thought of her dreams. But in that very moment, dread knotted his stomach as he overheard conversations between two corporate executives just down the hall. They were discussing technical failures with an upcoming flight to New York, a flight Lily had booked to chase her ambitions. His parched throat tightened as he listened, the words danger and overlooked pierced through his mind like a stinging slap. It felt like time slowed, the bustling crowd around him fading into a blur. They might not even know, he thought, an instinctual shudder rippling through his core. First moral dilemma crashed over him: should he ignore their dismissive laughter or speak up? He trembled, feeling the dual pull of dread and duty. These polished men dismissed him as an insignificant janitor, but Mark knew there was more at stake than his job title. It was his daughter's life that weighed on this moment. He wrestled with the silence surging in his throat, dread clawing at him. What if he faced backlash? What if Lily didn't get her chance at her dreams because her father dared to raise a warning? He felt extreme unease muted until now expand in his chest. A memory of Lily's smile surfaced, her graduation cap, her excited chatter about college life. Mark's heart sunk under the pressure. He had to do this for her. Parents were meant to protect their children, right? But how far could he go against the cold indifference of corporate arrogance? Before we continue, I need to tell you about something important that's happening. YouTube has been making changes to the system and many people are losing notifications from channels they follow. If you're enjoying the content, click the bell and mark all notifications so you don't miss the next videos. And if you can leave a like, it really helps with reach. Seriously, it makes a difference. Oh, tell me in the comments where you're watching from. I'm always curious to know who's on the other side of the screen. Now let's continue. Time clawed at Mark as he made his decision. The tension in the air tensed tighter like a taut string. Perhaps if he just turned away and returned to his mop, everything would carry on normally. But in doing so, he'd risk resigning himself to helplessness all over again, like when he had to let his neighbor's dog go without help, or like those nights when horror stories of job loss plagued his sleep. Every warning left unspoken left Lily's future unraveling like loose threads of a frayed tapestry. A rising tide of panic threatened to engulf him as the moments slipped away. Just then, another jolt snapped him erect. A vivid image of his daughter boarding that very flight flashed through his mind. The clock was ticking. How could he remain silent? Would making this stand cost him the only thing worth fighting for? Mark's pulse quickened as the ground beneath him felt increasingly unsteady. What would he choose, to remain invisible or to rise and be heard? The path ahead stretched sharper and clearer, demanding integrity that felt much heavier than the mop in his hand. Mark steadied himself, the harsh fluorescent lights buzzing overhead flickering like his racing thoughts. He took a deep breath, his stomach churning with trepidation, and stepped out from between the rows of bustling travelers. Each step felt monumental, an earthquake beneath the facade of his janitorial uniform. He approached the executives, their laughter abruptly silencing as they turned to assess this unexpected intruder. "Excuse me," he interjected, his voice shaky yet resolute, "I couldn't help but overhear your conversation." The words seemed to tangle on their way out, weighted by a lifetime of feeling invisible. Silence enveloped the space, tension crackling, holding everyone hostage. One of the executives raised an eyebrow, his expression condescending. "And you are?" "Mark. The janitor." The title sat heavily on his tongue, but he refused to let it define him in this moment. "I think you need to look into the issues with that flight." He spoke carefully, knowing that the next few moments could redefine everything. One of them chuckled dismissively. "We're quite busy here, Mark. We have things under control." But that only intensified the resolution in Mark's chest. What if you're wrong? What if something goes wrong when people are relying on you? The feeling of responsibility expanded inside him, both daunting and liberating. This wasn't about him anymore, it was about every passenger, every parent with children relying on their safety. "You have a duty to keep them safe," Mark pressed, the stakes escalating as determination seeped into his voice. The executives exchanged glances, their expressions momentarily shifting from condescension to irritation. "You're just a janitor. What could you possibly know about our operations?" The dismissive tone was clear and cringeworthy. Increasingly fueled by indignation, Mark's frustration turned into clarity. "I may not know about your operations, but I know about responsibility. I know about being a parent." He felt his passion igniting a fire inside him, each word driven by sheer necessity and love for his daughter. "Lily is on that flight." The name hung in the air, a bridge from corporate apathy to personal stakes. At that moment, one executive's anger receded into contemplation. "What do you suggest we do, Mark?" "Check your equipment, talk to the engineers, whatever it takes. For the passengers, for their families." An unexpected ally blossomed in the most peculiar of situations, and Mark recognized the power of standing up, of confronting the forces that seemed so insurmountable moments before. The two men hesitated, but the urgency in Mark's eyes broke through their armor of indifference. "Okay, let us escalate it. Meet with our operational team." The concession set off a chain reaction. He could see it in their eyes, a flicker of realization ignited by his words. As their conversation shifted toward action, Mark stepped back, a swell of pride rising in his chest. He suddenly felt bigger than the janitor's uniform he wore. He had spoken truth to power, not simply for himself, but for every individual who had once felt voiceless or insignificant. Each minute he fought for his daughter was also a little victory for himself. But where did this newfound courage come from? Memories of late nights helping Lily with her homework, the sacrifices of a single father, whispered in his mind. He questioned how privilege had shaped his life. For so long, he downplayed the depth of his capabilities. He had lived in a world that often punished honesty. But in breaking the silence, he stumbled upon not just strength, but a burgeoning resolve he hadn't known existed. As the executives walked away, ready to investigate, Mark found himself staring at the bustling terminal in renewed light. But just as relief began to seep in, he remembered, the fight wasn't over. It had only just begun. His daughter's future still hung in the balance. How would he navigate the challenges still ahead? What unexpected battles waited on the horizon as his newfound voice resonated throughout the airport? The true test of his resolve loomed closer, and deep down, Mark knew it had only just begun. Mark took a moment to collect himself, pushing aside the surging tide of anxiety that continued to ripple through him. He could hardly believe what he had just achieved. The mere act of confronting the executives felt monumental. Yet with every passing second, the reality of his daughter's flight loomed larger than his momentary triumph. As the executives marched away with urgency, a deep-seated dread settled in his mind. What if he hadn't acted in time? What if his efforts only delayed the inevitable? His hands clenched into fists as he watched them retreat, consumed by a swirl of thoughts and emotions. Bravery hadn't come easy, it had pulled at the threads of doubt twisted tightly in his mind. Mark was still a janitor, but perhaps he could become more than just that. The possibility ignited a spark of ambition that had laid dormant for far too long. But how could he chart this newfound path while balancing the responsibility of being a father? The stakes were no longer just about personal validation, they were about Lily's safety. Determined to seize this pivotal moment, he decided to remain close, lingering in the shadows of the executive meeting area. He needed to understand the operations, discover what they discussed, and equip himself with knowledge that could further protect his daughter and perhaps redefine his role in the airport ecosystem. He glanced around, scanning the area for signs of engagement. As the executives convened with their team, Mark felt a swell of curiosity urging him forward. What did these people really do? Looking for a doorway into their world, he silently observed their interactions, noting how they communicated not just with words, but with an entire language of gestures and expressions. Their confidence radiated, and a pang of envy twisted in his gut. In that moment, he caught a glimpse of an engineer entering the room. A functional diagram rolled tightly under one arm, he exuded a sense of calm control that drew Mark's attention. Driven by impulse, he stepped closer, his heart racing. "Excuse me," he called out softly, hesitatingly stepping into the path of the engineer, who paused, catching a glimpse of the janitor. Do you think you could tell me about the safety protocols for the flight?" His voice wavered, but he pushed through the discomfort, needing to know more. The engineer's brow furrowed, clearly assessing the unusual inquiry. Mark's determination filled the silence that followed. "I just overheard some concerns, and I need to understand how safe my daughter is." There was hesitation, but then the engineer shifted his weight, recognizing the sincerity in Mark's expression. "Safety protocols are extensive, but what you overheard, it could be serious. Want me to show you?" Mark felt a rush of adrenaline as he followed the engineer into the conference room, absorbing everything he could. This was a chance to not only advocate for Lily but also to learn, immerse himself in an understanding of aviation safety that transcended his ordinary role. As conversations around technical issues swirled, his perspective shifted. This knowledge wasn't simply for him, it became a tool, a way to ensure that he didn't just exist within the walls of the airport but could actually contribute meaningfully. The executives returned, their demeanor serious, bringing the gravity of the situation back to the forefront. Mark was on the brink of a crucial understanding. He wasn't merely a janitor, he was a participant in something larger. Each question he considered propelled him further up the ladder of awareness about the systems around him. The realization struck him like a thunderbolt. By gaining this knowledge, he could be an informed voice, one of authority rather than insignificance. But this empowerment also came with a burden. He would have to navigate through intricate layers of corporate dynamics, push back against entrenched attitudes, and consistently validate his insights. As the meeting progressed, Mark felt a new sense of responsibility welling within him, an internal shift that demanded he not shy away when it mattered most. The shadows now danced differently around him. He was no longer a passive observer but a hybrid of an instinctive protector and an emerging advocate. What challenges awaited as he began this turbulent ascent? Could he sustain the momentum of his courage while juggling the weight of responsibility and the fragility of his daughter's safety? The uncharted territories loomed ahead, pulling Mark toward an inevitable confrontation that would test his mettle like never before. Mark stood in the conference room, his mind racing with the revelations taking shape around him. The engineer, a figure of unyielding assurance, was deep into explaining the complex layers of safety protocols, each detail unraveling like a thread that connected the fabric of the airport's operations. The gravity of the discussions weighed heavily on Mark, yet with each piece of knowledge he gained, he felt a new sense of control blossoming within him. Though he was still treated as invisible by many of the executives, Mark's heart pulsed with the rhythm of newfound purpose. This knowledge, this understanding was more than just an academic curiosity, it was personal. The stakes had escalated, shifting from abstract concepts of safety to the literal protection of Lily. As technical terms flowed from the engineer's lips, Mark grasped their implications, momentarily pushing aside the gnawing fear that had dogged him for days. Intrigued yet intimidated, Mark leaned into the conversation, asking pointed questions that surprised even him. "How do you ensure that safety checks during takeoff are foolproof?" he asked, the query pouring out of him before he could second-guess its relevance. His curiosity was not merely a reflection of his worry but an awakening of his potential. The engineer nodded appreciatively at his engagement, illuminating parts of the discussion that had once felt agonizingly out of reach. However, with knowledge came the weight of responsibility. Mark started to realize that he had to be prepared for resistance. Changing the status quo was daunting, especially from his position, where assumptions of competence were rarely aligned with reality. He noted the tension between the executives, beneath their poised exteriors lurked a discomfort he found familiar, an unspoken fear of scrutiny and the imperative to perform perfectly under public gaze. As the meeting continued, Mark's internal compass pointed sharply towards one goal: he must ensure Lily flew safely. The walls of the room felt increasingly like a cage, and every spoken word seemed to echo his frustrations with being overlooked. What if no one listened? What if his rising voice was dismissed as the ramblings of a janitor? A chilling doubt momentarily stalled his trajectory. Mark knew he could not falter. His daughter's safety hinged on his willingness to challenge the norms, to confront fears not only of inadequacy but of indifference. With this resolve crystallizing, he realized that lurking just beneath the surface of his anxiety was an undeniable urge to lead, not just within the bounds of his job but in the dynamics of decision-making that affected countless lives. When the meeting concluded, an executive casually approached Mark, glancing at him with the same dismissive demeanor he had grown accustomed to. But for the first time, Mark stood tall, no longer slouched or at odds with himself. Invoking the courage he'd gathered, he initiated a conversation. "I noticed the safety concerns mentioned earlier. Perhaps I can help in some capacity." The executive raised an eyebrow, the flicker of skepticism evident. "And how would a janitor like you help us?" Mark felt the adrenaline surge, and he matched the man's gaze with unyielding steadiness. "I understand more than just cleaning procedures now. I'm starting to see the bigger picture." The response hung in the air, heavy with uncertainty. Before the executive stepped back, skepticism turned to deliberation. In that moment, Mark sensed the scales tipping, the air charged with promise. Something had shifted. What would it take to transform his knowledge into actionable influence? The challenges loomed larger than ever, but his fight had only just begun. Mark was no longer insulated by janitorial duties. He felt the spark of a crusader igniting within him. And at that moment, the tension became palpable. Would he continue to harness his newfound authority, or would he retreat back into the comfort of obscurity? The ultimate test approached a confrontation with the very system he sought to challenge, where his voice would either shatter the glass ceiling or reverberate against it, unnoticed. Determined to take the next step, he couldn't shake the feeling that a collision was imminent. How hard would he have to push to make them listen? The stakes had never felt higher, and there was no turning back now. As Mark left the conference room, adrenaline coursed through him. The executive's skeptical expression lingered at the forefront of his mind, a stark reminder of the uphill battle ahead. The blend of anxiety and excitement bubbled within him, a volatile concoction that propelled his steps towards the maintenance workshop. Every passing official, every business-suited figure, cast a shadow of doubt over his aspirations. How could he, a janitor, bridge the gap between his reality and the chaos surrounding aviation safety? He entered the workshop, where a handful of mechanics and maintenance staff were gathered, tools scattered across the benches like pieces of a puzzle yet to be solved. Despite the camaraderie among them, there was still a chasm between their expertise and his newfound insights. Mark took a breath and approached a group huddled over a panel of equipment, clutching the threads of knowledge he'd just begun to stitch together. "Hey guys," he called out, his voice surprising even himself with its timbre. "Can I ask a couple of questions about the safety checks?" The men paused, some glancing at him with mild curiosity while others resumed their tasks. One mechanic, with grease-streaked hands, shrugged in acknowledgement. "Sure, what's on your mind?" Mark seized the momentum, digging into the understanding he'd garnered. "I've been learning about safety protocols in the conference room. Can you explain how those protocols translate to your daily checks?" The mechanic stood a bit straighter, perhaps intrigued by Mark's direct approach. "We check systems every day, making sure everything is functioning as it should." "But what exactly are you getting at?" Encouraged, Mark pressed on. "What about redundancies? Are there fail-safes built into all the systems? It's about ensuring that no single point of failure can put something at risk." The mechanic regarded him closely, an eyebrow raised. "You've been listening in, huh? There are some protocols that trigger backup systems, but we can always improve on those." It's a constant battle to stay ahead of potential issues. A flicker of hope ignited within Mark. Here was the moment that could reshape his standing. He wasn't just a shadow among giants, he was a thread interconnected with their operational framework. They were all working toward the same goal, even if they didn't know it yet. Let us create a system to assess every safety measure objectively, he proposed. I'm not an engineer, but I see the gaps we can fill. It's not just about cleaning floors anymore, it's about cleaning up vulnerabilities. The atmosphere shifted, tension radiating as their curiosity deepened. Their frowns transformed into thoughtful stares, and Mark recognized this moment for what it was: a potential turning point. Finally, he had entered the conversation on their turf. An older mechanic scratched his chin. You make a valid point. What's the plan then, Mr. Clean? The jibe contained playful banter but also an invitation, a subtle shift in perception. Mark cleared his throat, attempting to structure his emerging thoughts. Well, first we need to identify what needs immediate attention and then develop a reporting process. I can boost our observations from the janitorial side. I observe the flow of people and equipment more than most. If we can integrate that perspective, we might catch things others overlook. Discussions began to flourish, and as they dissected ideas and possibilities, Mark felt his confidence swell. Engagement spurred action, and he saw himself interjecting with ideas, his voice rising to meet conversations with purpose. But deep down, a new worry crept in. Were the executives truly ready to embrace this out-of-place collaboration? Would they consider his contributions valuable enough to act upon? Mark realized that convincing them was just as vital as the engagement he was fostering now. The workshop buzzed with possibilities, but outside was a storm of skepticism waiting to lash out. Mark's pulse quickened. His personal journey was entwined with the collective progress he now pursued. The clock ticked down to the day Lily would fly again, and if this effort faltered, everything he had fought for might just slip away. He resolved then to cement this alliance, to turn his insights into undeniable influence. What would it take to confront the executives again, to make his voice resonate beyond the walls of the workshop? The unsettling doubt returned, but so did the fire urging him forward. It was clear now the ultimate test loomed closer than ever. Mark's drive surged once more. He had the rhythm of purpose and resolve. How far would he go to ensure the safety of those he loved? Would he risk everything to become a voice that couldn't be ignored? The stakes had escalated. As the workshop chatter continued, Mark felt a pulse of determination. The stage was set, and he was ready for the next move. The buzz of conversation faded to a low hum as Mark focused on the discussions unfolding in front of him. His heart raced, the weight of their shifting perceptions creating a charged atmosphere. It was exhilarating, yet daunting. He was no longer just a janitor, he was an instant catalyst for change. Yet, amid this thrilling momentum, a gnawing concern clung to him like a persistent shadow. Could he leverage this newfound respect to push his ideas past the threshold of skepticism that encased the executive boards? They were experts in their fields, established figures encased in polished armor. While Mark acknowledged their extensive knowledge, he was convinced that his unique viewpoint might complement their existing understanding of aviation safety remarkably. Despite his apprehension, he felt emboldened. The stakes were not just professional, they were deeply personal. He thought of Lily soaring above the clouds, and that vision propelled him against the tide of doubt. Each discussion transformed him, lifting his spirits and unveiling glimmers of his hidden capabilities. Here he was, a janitor advocating for safety measures, yet he had successfully ignited an inquiry among seasoned mechanics. Their inquiries swung back to him, probing for solutions, ideas. He felt the pull of camaraderie among them, straw grasped from the haystack of his uncertain beginnings. The mechanics shared anecdotes of their experiences, and Mark instinctively began to categorize their insights. Listening carefully, he utilized each conversation as a learning experience and a challenge to bolster his argument. This hybrid perspective he was cultivating, part janitorial, part mechanical, seemed like an uncharted territory, one he was ready to explore. "Mark, you seem to have a knack for this," a young mechanic, Jake remarked. Have you thought about formal education? You'd probably be a natural in engineering. The comment sparked an internal whirlwind within Mark. He had never considered pursuing higher education. The matters of practicality had often overrated the importance of dreams in his life. But within the moment of encouragement, hope sprouted. Could he truly evolve from janitor to advocate for safety? The thought electrified him, creating a new path illuminated before his feet. He could take evening classes, spend weekends attending seminars, anything to cultivate his newfound passion. The thought alone breathed life into his restrained ambitions. But a harsh reality surfaced. The day-to-day responsibilities and financial limitations bound him tighter than chains. Determined not to let the flame of inspiration extinguish, Mark made a mental note to investigate possible scholarship options. If he was going to make a real change, he needed more than self-taught lessons. He needed to infiltrate the world of engineering with knowledge, a more concrete armor to shield against the inevitable doubts that would surface from the higher-ups. Time seemed to evaporate, and the reality of an upcoming executive meeting loomed larger in his mind. Would he have the courage to present his ideas and stand resolute against the skeptics? Internal conflict swirled within him. He envisioned standing before not just the executives but the very mechanics who had begun to believe in him. Mark glanced around the workshop, taking stock of how far he had come within such a short span. A sense of clarity emerged. Stepping behind the facade of a humble janitor had opened doors to dialogues he had never imagined. Yet, he understood that this initial victory meant little unless it translated into lasting change. The workshop's commotion began to fade as Mark prepared himself mentally for the next step. His resolve crystallized: he would speak up in the meeting, influence change, and not shy away from expressing his ideas. Suddenly, the implications of his journey started pressing heavier on his chest. The executives needed to grasp that real perspectives often derived from those who witnessed the machinery of their operations from a ground-level viewpoint. As he gathered his thoughts for the upcoming confrontation, a buzz of realization surged through him. This was no longer just about safety procedures or technological protocols, it was about visibility and acknowledgement of untapped talents. He had a responsibility, not only to himself but to those around him who felt unheard and trapped within their confines. Staring ahead at nothing in particular, Mark felt a palpable shift within him. The time had come to confront the skeptics. He had to make his voice resonate beyond the janitor's closet. How would he overcome the executive's implied hierarchy? Their silence awoke a furious determination within him. What awaited him at that meeting? Potential validation or simmering skepticism? Challenging both the executives and himself, Mark stood perched at the cusp of a new chapter, heart racing, ready to risk everything for a voice that couldn't be ignored. Mark stood in front of the executive boardroom, his heart pounding like the engines of a jet preparing for takeoff. The polished doors loomed before him, a barrier between the world he had always known and the one he was about to challenge. He took a deep breath, collecting himself, reminding himself of all the moments that had brought him here. Inside, the executives were settling into their seats, reviewing documents that carried the weight of authority. He could see the glimmers of skepticism in their eyes, their polished roles intimidating even from several feet away. Mark felt a wave of self-doubt trickle down his spine. Was he truly ready for this? Stepping through the door, he was met with crisp suits and raised eyebrows, an army fit for battle. He could feel the weight of their expectations. His palms were sweaty, and in a moment of panic, he almost turned to leave. But he inhaled deeply, envisioning Lily's serene smile. It grounded him. "This is for you," he whispered under his breath, a determination settling within him like the calm after a storm. After a moment of silence, the lead executive, a formidable figure named Mr. Kensington, fixed his gaze on Mark. "And you are?" The tone was flat, almost dismissive, yet Mark sensed an opportunity nestled within that challenge. "I'm Mark," he began, the room's eyes pivoting toward him. "I'm the janitor." A ripple of barely contained laughter slid through the executives. Mark shifted on his feet. "I know that may not sound impressive, but the reality is, I've been observing the processes here and have some insights on safety protocols that could significantly improve our operations." The laughter subsided as the room grew silent. He launched into his prepared observations, weaving anecdotes from conversations with mechanics into poignant points. He spoke of visibility and safety procedures, highlighting small yet critical oversights he noticed while cleaning the aircraft, the lack of regular checks in certain areas, the overlooked safety equipment. As he progressed, he could see flickers of interest peek through their executive facades. An unexpected confidence surged through him, the mechanics' support echoed in his mind, providing him a soft cushion against their skepticism. Mark found himself leaning into that rhythm, captivated not just by the statistics but by his growing credibility. He was no longer just a voice, he was a part of the conversation. Midway through, Mrs. Burton, a senior manager known for her relentless critique, interjected with a sharpness that sliced through his momentum. "Mark, with all due respect, you're not an engineer. You lack formal training. Why should we trust your perspective?" The question hung heavy in the air. Mark paused, his heart racing, gears turning in his mind. He could hear the mechanics' voices again, echoing their own frustrations. He thought about how often their opinions had been brushed aside. But what made the janitor worthy of consideration? "It's true," he finally responded, "that I don't have the education they do, but that doesn't limit my capacity to see issues that could affect lives. I may lack formal degrees, but I have practical experience that no textbook can teach. This isn't just about data, it's about our brothers and sisters who literally risk their lives each day in this industry. Sometimes the most valuable insights come from the ground up." The room was still. The executives shifted in their seats, the tension palpable. Perhaps it was the raw sincerity in his voice or the undeniable urgency of his plea that cut through their armor. Mark could sense that he had landed a powerful strike, but one question lingered on his mind: would they care enough to listen? The back and forth sparked questions, probing his ideas more deeply. Each response fortified Mark's resolve. This wasn't merely about their acceptance, it was an essential step toward ensuring safety, and he believed fervently in the validity of his voice. After what felt like an eternity, Mr. Kensington leaned forward, interest piqued. "If we were to consider your recommendations, what would your next steps be?" The thought, once a mere echo in the back of his mind, now crystallized into a viable path. But with new possibilities on the horizon, doubt began to creep back in. Could he genuinely help incite change, or was this just the calm before the storm of rejection? As he plotted his response, Mark realized that this moment, a conversation that might transform his life and the lives of others in the industry, was just the beginning. Navigating not only the boardroom politics but also those deeply rooted insecurities required the same courage he had mustered to make it this far. What awaited him next? A potentially groundbreaking opportunity or a crushing defeat? As he prepared to seize the moment, the tension thickened, the boardroom awaited his next words with bated breath. Mark took a moment, the boardroom filled with silence that felt almost suffocating. He could sense the anticipation from the executives, their attention, once mockingly dismissive, had now shifted into something more earnest. A flicker of hope ignited within him as he realized that this moment could lead to actual change. "In terms of next steps," he started, his voice steadying as he embraced the gravity of the situation, "I propose we initiate a series of workshops led by the mechanics. They know the systems inside and out, and I can facilitate those conversations, ensuring that their insights reach the team responsible for implementing safety standards. We can also set up regular audits, simple checks that involve not just the paperwork but the physical environments." As he spoke, he could see Mr. Kensington leaning back slightly, considering Mark's suggestions. For the first time, he noticed a subtle nod from Mrs. Burton, an indication that perhaps his passion was beginning to resonate. Mark's heart raced, the weight of his words pressing warmly against the doubts that swirled underneath. He could influence voices that needed to be heard. "What makes you think the mechanics will want to participate?" Mrs. Burton challenged, but the sharpness of her tone was dulled slightly by intrigue. "They're already invested," he replied, his confidence strengthening with each passing moment. They care about the safety and efficiency of their work, about saving lives. I've talked to them after late shifts, they want their voices amplified. If given a platform, they will step up. Mark's thoughts turned inward briefly, reflecting on the camaraderie he shared with his colleagues, the countless hours spent together discussing the heavy realities of their work. He could visualize their faces, filled with tired determination and the thirst for recognition. This was not just a conversation to him, it was a chance to elevate them. Mr. Kensington pressed forward. You seem confident, Mark, but confidence alone won't prove your points. You need a tangible proposal, metrics, timelines. How will you measure success? By focusing on the feedback and engagement from the mechanics during and after our workshops, Mark answered quickly, rattling off specific metrics he now recognized from his time on the ground: reduction in safety incidents, increase in maintenance checks tracked over time, and metrics on compliance checks post-training. We'll set benchmarks that we can track regularly. I'm prepared to work on this plan after our discussion today. The executives exchanged looks, the tension morphing into a burgeoning excitement. Mark realized they were starting to see not just him as a janitor but as someone who could integrate their world of expertise with hands-on experience in a meaningful way. It was exhilarating and terrifying. Yet, just as this newfound sense of possibility washed over him, self-doubt began its creeping entry once again. What if they didn't follow through? What if the mechanics' voices were drowned out once more? What if his plan failed? I understand that making changes requires commitment beyond this boardroom, he continued, grounding himself by focusing on his intent rather than the timid whispers of fear. But if we don't take this step, the risks we face aren't just numbers on a spreadsheet, they translate to real people's lives. I want to be part of the solution. As he concluded, he stared around the room, searching for any signs of hope, of genuine interest that would assert his presence here as more than just a temporary interruption. Mr. Kensington leaned forward again, a thoughtful expression crossing his face. Very well. We'll review your proposal, and I'd like to give you the opportunity to present your plan in more detail, provided you can draft it by the end of the week. But remember, the ball is in your court now. Mark felt a rush of adrenaline surge through him. This was the moment he had been fighting for, the very chance to solidify his place in this corporate landscape. But an icy question lingered: would he crumble under the weight of expectation, or would he forge ahead with the mechanics' truths propelling him forward? Beneath the surface, the voice of caution whispered that this was only the beginning. What if he couldn't build that bridge between theory and reality? In the days to come, Mark would have to confront not only the technical side of his project but also the shadows of self-doubt that threatened to overtake him once more. As he left the boardroom, he couldn't shake the feeling that while this was a victory, the real fight had just begun. With his mind racing and plans forming, he realized he was nearing a crossroads. Would he have the strength to navigate both his internal fears and external challenges? The horizon looked promising, but the road ahead was fraught with uncertainty. Mark stepped out of the boardroom, his heart pounding with a mixture of adrenaline and anxiety. The walls that had once felt confining now echoed his thoughts, his proposal, his standing, and the challenges that lay ahead. He needed to turn the flicker of hope into a blazing reality. As soon as he crossed the threshold, silence enveloped him, broken only by the faint sounds of the busy office around him. It reminded him that the world went on, indifferent to his internal turbulence. The gravity of the task at hand weighed heavily on his shoulders. He had never crafted a detailed proposal to this caliber before. Gathering the necessary metrics, articulating the workshops, and ensuring the mechanics felt valued, each decision was a step into a realm he had yet to genuinely inhabit. The fear of failure threatened to paralyze his progress, casting shadows over his thoughts. He took a deep breath and began to map out his strategy in his mind. In his busyness, he reflected on what improvisation had built him thus far. Growing up, he learned the art of adaptation, pivoting from one day to the next in a low-income household. That ability had driven him through countless shifts, now it had to fuel this vital change. It's about the details, he muttered to himself, jogging memories from his interactions with the mechanics. Their stories didn't just convey a message, they embodied the passion for safety and knowledge. He needed to transfer that passion into quantifiable results. Returning home after a long day felt surreal. The modest living room seemed to pulse with energy, mirroring the chaotic jitters racing in his bloodstream. His young daughter, Lily, was sprawled on the floor, surrounded by a world of crayons and paper, lost in her imagination. Mark took a moment to watch her, the way her brows furrowed in concentration as she scribbled, and her little tongue poking out in determination brought him warmth, dispelling some of the pressures clouding his mind. He scooped her up and cradled her against him. "Hey, kiddo. How was school?" he asked, kissing the top of her head. "Good. I drew you a picture," she exclaimed, eyes bright. He set her down gently and examined the colorful scribbles, realizing that each stroke was an impression of her world, as vital as his own struggles. Mark felt a profound sense of responsibility, not only to change the culture at work but to model resilience for her. That evening, he conceptualized the proposal on the dining table, sheets of paper strewn all around. He brainstormed ways to ensure the mechanics felt acknowledged, proposing feedback forms for their insights before and after the workshops. He allowed himself to envision their faces, elated at being listened to, empowered by having their knowledge valued. The stakes were real, yet they could make a difference. But as dawn approached, self-doubt crept back in a relentless whisper that mocked his ambitions. What if the executives saw his inexperience as a liability? What if they dismissed the mechanic's input as trivial? Each thought threatened to unravel his progress, an uphill battle filled with invisible daggers. Determined to confront these demons, he forced himself to write down his hesitations and address them methodically. He needed to gather their input directly, to gain real anecdotes that would bridge his experiences and theirs. He would request meetings with the mechanics to discuss the proposed workshops before the presentation, crafting a collaborative spirit that could silence skepticism. As the week pressed onward, the urgency of the upcoming proposal left him restless at night. Each day, he felt closer to a breakthrough yet remained on edge, balancing between trepidation and resolve. The notion that he could collapse under the weight of expectation loomed large. Just as his ideas began coalescing into a cohesive strategy, a moment arose that would testingly push him over the edge. An unexpected situation developed as he overheard two executives taking jabs at his existence in their world just outside the conference room from the familiar haunts of the office. The demeaning comment struck a nerve, shaking his confidence. Fueled by a surge of indignation, he had to decide, would he allow their indifference to define his journey, or would he confront the systemic issues with tenacity? At that moment, Mark made a choice that would either ensure his place among the executives or cascade him into obscurity. The real question now loomed ahead: would the fight for change ignite a more profound transformation within him? Mark took a moment to gather himself before he approached the boardroom again. The bitter words he overheard, callous and unyielding, were sharp enough to pierce through the flickering confidence he had fought so hard to build. As he stood there, a sense of visceral determination ignited within him. He had come too far to be deterred by the dismissals of others. Striding forward, he opened the boardroom doors with purpose. The executives, ensconced in their chairs, turned their attention towards him, their expressions a mix of curiosity and skepticism. Steel and resolve warmed his voice as he spoke out. "I've been reflecting on what we've discussed, and I want to emphasize that I'm not merely advocating for the mechanic's perspective, I'm representing the safety of our passengers, families, our future." He felt clarity surging through him, grounding him in that moment. Each word sliced through the tension that had previously coiled around him. Mark moved to the whiteboard, feeling the weight of eyes upon him, and began sketching upon its surface. "Let's break this down. The gaps I've identified in our safety protocols can result in cascading effects that harm our operational integrity." Detail after detail cascaded from him, igniting the room with an energy that was both palpable and engaging. As his proposal unfolded, he noticed the executives leaning in, the air shifting subtly in the room. Their previous cynicism wore off as they began to see him not as just a janitor, but as an informed advocate radiating knowledge. Every statistic, colloquial anecdote, and direct engagement with the mechanics brought vibrancy to Mark's presentation. He had transformed his fear into unwavering conviction. Each narrative he shared was a testament to why safety mattered. When he concluded, stillness cloaked the room. Finally, Mrs. Burton spoke, a newfound respect underpinning her tone. "Mark, your insights are compelling. If you can develop a fully fleshed-out proposal incorporating these observations with specific timelines and roles, I believe we can present this to higher management." Inside, a powerful tide of achievement welled up in Mark. He had not only articulated his vision, but he had also shifted perception, a feat he had once thought impossible. Days turned into a blur as he collaborated with his fellow mechanics, ensuring their voices resonated in every facet of the proposal. With their feedback woven into the fabric of his ideas, Mark transformed the document into a robust strategy focused on accountability. He crafted a dynamic plan with clear metrics for assessing safety performance that addressed every concern he felt in that heated boardroom exchange. When he finally presented the comprehensive proposal to the executives, flaunting the confidence he had fostered along this tumultuous journey, their reaction was markedly different. They were engaged, nodding, considering. Words of approval soon fell from their lips, such as, "We'll implement this immediately." As he walked out of the boardroom, elated with accomplishment, he considered his own transformation. Mark had woven himself into the very fabric of the organization with intelligence and resolve, not merely through menial tasks but through voicing significant insights forged from lived experiences. He had taken action that explicitly defined not just who he was, but who he could become. Weeks later, a significant training session gathered top management and mechanics alike, showcasing the success of their collaborative approach. Each participant flourished, discussing insights that had been historically overlooked. The echoes of their shared knowledge rippled across corridors, sparking a culture of ongoing dialogue, one that valued the latent potential of every individual within the ranks. As Mark watched his daughter in her school play that evening, beaming with pride, he felt his heart swell with fulfillment. He had conquered his internal demons, standing tall as a change agent who became an integral player in the safety of countless passengers. The weight of years spent in silence had been shattered by his newfound voice, renowned and respected. While clarity surrounding his next steps began to form, attending local community college courses in engineering, he understood that he had charted a new course for himself, one filled with responsibility, purpose, and the encroaching promise of achievement. Now, he could never again allow himself to be invisible. The journey he'd embarked upon was not just for him or even for Lily, but for anyone who felt unheard, an expedition to validate voices long silenced. This was the realization of dreams and aspirations, testament to genuine transformation, born from the courage to speak up and act. You need to subscribe now to the channel to not miss the next exclusive emotional stories. Leave a like now to feed the algorithm, it makes a difference and helps us bring you more content. Comment your reactions and theories about this ending, let us know how Mark's journey impacted you. Don't wait even one more second to share this video with at least 5 friends who need to see this conclusion.